Welcome to the Relaunch Your Career podcast. I am your host, Leah Lambert, career and interview coach and founder of Relaunch Me, where we help you find the work that you were meant to do. Welcome to the Relaunch Your Career podcast. Today I am interviewing Rebekah Murphy, who has made a huge career change and changed countries to pursue a career in UX design. Welcome to the podcast, Rebekah.
Thank you so much, Leah, for having me. I'm really excited to chat to you today.
Well, Rebekah, as I mentioned, I did hear your story, and as a result, I just couldn't wait to get you on the podcast because I believe that your story and the decisions you've made would be such a terrific help to people who are considering a career change in anything related to design or digital. So before we get into what you're doing in your current role, can you give us a little bit of insight into how you first started your career after high school?
Definitely. So I guess I finished high school and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I guess maths and like all those kind of like easy numbers and things like that were something that I was super, super interested in. So because of that, I decided to move into engineering. So I did my undergrad in engineering, specifically electronic engineering. Did that for 4 years. Really liked it. I guess by the end of it, I was kind of done with the intensity that comes with that kind of degree. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but as an engineer, you or I found anyway, you focused quite deeply on a specific topic. And for me, I wasn't interested in staying in something like that. So I wanted to move into something where I had a bit more variety in my career. So instead of moving into an engineering role, I decided to look into consulting. So specifically technology consulting. So I still had the technical aspect that I liked from engineering, but maybe a little bit of a difference with regard to like industries and things like that. So I moved into Accenture and I worked there for a couple of years.
And can you tell us a little bit about the work that you were doing whilst you're at Accenture?
Yeah, of course. So it was quite interesting. So I guess I started off in their graduate program, which was, you were a technology consultant working on client-facing projects. And I did that for about a year and a half. And honestly, I wasn't like, it was great. Like the people were amazing and my team were super supportive, but the actual content and the projects that I was doing were just not as interesting as I thought they were going to be. So, think massive digital transformation projects, which for someone who's quite junior in the company, obviously isn't very interesting. So I guess I wanted to look at for something a little bit more aligned to my interest in technology. So I looked at Accenture's Innovation Centre. So they had just launched their new flagship Innovation Centre in Dublin, in the docks. And there was a couple of roles opening up around for specific teams within data science. And I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. That kind of hints at, like, touches on my mathsy bits and things like that. So I was like, okay, I applied for that, and then I moved into their innovation center for a more internal role on creating data science products for actually Accenture themselves.
And so how did you find that transition?
So I guess it was interesting. There was an internal transition, and I think those can always be a little. They can be, you'll hear, I guess, they can be easy or hard. So for this one, it was quite easy because it was a similar role. So, I was going from a business analyst role to an agile business analyst role, which naturally progressed into a scrum master role. So for me, that initial transition was fine because I was, kind of jumping into a different team, but doing the same thing. So they were, there was confidence there. People were like, okay, she kind of knows what she's doing. That's fine. We can hire her in. So that was actually an okay transition that initial time.
So what did you feel was missing then so you ended up working as a Scrum Master. What did you feel was missing, I guess, from the work that you were doing that led you to then explore other career options even outside of Accenture?
when I was working as a Scrum Master, I was working on a team that was solving really interesting problems. But my role in that team was quite high level, I guess. Like I was doing a lot of the project management stuff. I was ensuring that things were delivered on time. Whereas, for someone who likes getting involved in the nitty gritty details of things and like who likes to figure out and solve problems, I just wasn't getting that from my current role as a Scrum Master. And then I also got the opportunity to see a couple of people working as UX designers. So within Accenture's Innovation Center, there's Fjord, which is the service design arm within Accenture. And I got to see kind of projects that they were doing and even just how they solved problems and how they delivered projects, was so different. And I was just like, this is unbelievable. And I couldn't believe that kind of there was a type of role like that out there. It was something that I was like, this is exactly what I was looking for, but yet didn't know it existed. So yeah, I think it was a bit of a serendipitous moment when I figured that out.
And so did you also explore perhaps what the opportunity to move into that area within Accenture at that time?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like that was like the first kind of step I took was, I'd done the initial transition before from, I guess, a client-facing technology business analyst role to an internal Scrum Master role. And I was like, okay, so, I could probably just do this again within Accenture. But I did find that because I didn't have any previous experience as a UX designer, it was very tough. And just like, it was interesting because, you talk to one person and they'd be like, oh, you need, a master's degree to become a designer. And I was like, okay. And then another person would be like, oh no, like you can learn on the job. But then when you kind of start applying for internal roles, they're like, oh, but you're a Scrum Master. We also need one of those. And we know that you can do that. So why don't you be a Scrum Master first? And then maybe we can talk about being a designer. And I was just like, okay, this just all seems a little complicated, or not even complicated, but it was just like, there wasn't a direct way for me to get in. It seemed like I would have to work a little bit more in a role that I was already not very interested in before I could move into a role that I was interested in, which is a designer.
So Rebekah, look, career change is it's a huge decision at the best of times, and one that I believe, we encourage our clients to undertake a significant amount of research before they embark on the actual jump. Can you tell us a little bit about the research methods that you undertook to be sure that UX definitely was the right career for you?
The main thing I did, and one of the big things, was just speak to people. So, in Ireland, like everyone kind of knows everyone. So, it's easy to find people who are in some way connected to someone else who works in design. So I was lucky that through work, I was able to meet people who worked as UX designers, and I got to talk to them and ask them, what do they do for their, like, what is their day-to-day like? Does it change? What do they like? What do they dislike? Where do they see themselves in a couple of years? How did they even get to where they are now? Those were a lot of the questions that I wanted to answer. So that was kind of like speaking to people who were, I guess, at my level, my age, or, as a junior designer potentially. Then I also wanted to talk to people who were maybe more senior, who could see me as a potential hire. So I reached out on LinkedIn, or I asked people who I knew were connected to people on LinkedIn who were the like senior designers. And I asked them to give me an intro. And I spoke to a couple of them, and I was like, looking at me and looking at my past experience, is this something that I can get into? And do you think that it could be something that a person like me would be interested in based on like the conversations that I had with kind of senior designers? So I guess that was the main thing, like talking to people and then also just trying it out. So one thing I did was, I did a couple of hackathons. I went to a couple of meetups, and I kind of checked afterwards. It's like, okay, not really knowing what I was doing, or like not really knowing if it was something that I was interested in. Am I still interested afterwards? And I just think that sense check was super important for me as well.
Yeah, great. And we talk to people all the times about, having a set of criteria to test and validate against. And I guess some of the criteria might be, does the work energize you? Does it use your strengths? Is it sustainable? Will you get paid enough to do it? Did you have your own set of criteria that you were validating against?
Oh, yes, 100%. So for me, to figure out whether I wanted to go into UX design, I wanted to see, is this something that I would want to do for, for a couple of years, for, 5 years, or could I see myself progressing in this career? Could I, like, the day to day, does that excite me? Is that something that I would be interested in? Based on, doing a hackathon, is it something that I could do already? So for example, there's certain parts of UX design that you can pick up on the job, or, you can do with practice. So, interviewing, doing user interviews, doing usability testing, a lot of this, although it comes with practice and experience and, having a bit of knowledge is important. Is it something that, excites you, or you would be interested in doing? And doing those hackathons helps you to figure that out. So I think those were the main things. It's like, I just wanted to know if it was something I liked, but also I wanted to figure out how do I need to get there? So, do I have to do a master's, or, can I go with my current experience, or do I need to do some sort of education course to get in? Was another thing as well that I wanted to validate with people.
I just wanted to go back to the hackathons.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit of, for people who may not know what that involves, can you tell us a little bit about what that involves and how someone would find out about a hackathon and join?
Yeah, so I guess for me, I was quite lucky that within Accenture, or like within my team, people were always getting, there was always kind of things like this that were going on. So a hackathon, I guess, is maybe like a 2 or a 3 day event where you are given a problem and you have to try and come up with a solution. And there's, many different types of hackathons. So there could be software developer hackathons where you're actually kind of developing, or like, writing the code and developing it out. And then there's also some of the ones that I was doing was design hackathons, which meant, you were given a problem and then you were told, okay, go out into the world and ask people, is this actually a problem that's worth solving? And if it is, how do you solve it? And then, so you're put into teams of, 3 to 5, depending, and you go out there. So how I found out about a couple of these was through, I guess, like, just different networks. So I was part of a couple of groups within my workforce. I was also part of a couple of meetups. Some of the meetups, they do have kind of longer phased like meetings, I guess, would be these hackathons. I also just started connecting with people on LinkedIn who were, I guess, promoting some of these events. So, if you talk to people who are like product leads or product managers or design leads, they are always a lot of them would be kind of sharing these type of events that would be going on. And I think that's kind of how I would find out about them.
Yeah, that is so helpful. And it's, such a huge part of validating career change is undertaking experiments. And, you've just given us some great examples of how you actually experimented to get a taste of whether it is something that you want to continue doing long term. So, Rebekah, you then made a very big decision to leave your family and friends in Ireland and come all the way to Sydney to study the UX immersive course at General Assembly. How did you actually choose that particular course and make that move?
Well, it's typical Irish thing. I think there's anyone in Sydney will know a few Irish people who've made the jump for the weather or whatever it is. But I guess for me, I've always really wanted to work abroad, and it was one of the reasons why I wanted to work for an international company and things like that. So I guess the main reason I decided to move over was I'd spoken to a couple of designers who had actually worked in Sydney. So, I spoke to them back in Dublin and they were like, okay, there is a bit of a design community here, but like, are you interested in traveling? And I was like, oh my God, yes, I really want to move away. I want to move to Sydney. I want to live by the beach, the standard spiel you'll probably hear. And they were like, okay, great. And then another reason was that none of these design immersive courses were actually in Dublin. So if I wanted to take one of these courses, I had to move away. So the fact that I got, I guess, a better, or I could improve my quality of life by moving to the beach or moving to Sydney. And it was also a country that I really wanted to live in. And then also go and try out one of these courses. So for example, in Sydney, obviously there is a couple of these different boot camps. And the reason I chose the one that I did, which is the General Assembly UX Design Immersive, was through recommendations. So initially I was, there's the Academy XI and UX and the General Assembly course. And I was looking at the two of them. I spoke to the two different course directors, I guess, and saw, I guess they kind of had quite similar, they're similar courses. And for me, the reason I chose General Assembly was based off a couple of recommendations that I got from more senior designers. So I asked them, if you had a candidate with this Academy XI or General Assembly, and they were very much like, look, they're very similar, and our only preference might be if you start working in a country that doesn't have Academy XI, because that's based in Australia mostly, or I think solely, and whereas General Assembly has a bit more of a global recognition. That's why they said to choose the General Assembly course. So that's why I chose General Assembly.
Okay, look, I'm going to ask you some more questions about the course in a minute. Before we get into that, I mean, I can imagine, when we talk to people about career change, there's a lot of fear associated with, actually making the jump. And I think that's particularly so for people who are working in a big company somewhere like Accenture, which is everyone else, thinks you are so lucky to have this great job and you're in this well-known company. I mean, I can't imagine how your friends and family would have reacted when you told them you were quitting Accenture to move to do a course in Australia. Like, how did they react?
Oh my God, yeah. My poor friends and family, well, first of all, they had no idea what UX design was. So I think they kind of thought that I was gone a bit crazy or something. And they were like, you want to be a design, like, you want to be a designer? What does that even mean? And you want to move halfway across the world? Like, what? So yeah, like that was a big shock to them initially. But then when I guess I'd been talking about it with, my mom, for example, for a while, and she knew I really wanted to travel and I really wanted to move and live somewhere else. And the idea of UX design, I guess she had a bit of confidence in me where she was like, look, you're not going to just quit your job and move across the world for some random idea, or you've done a bit of research. And she knew that because she had seen me going to all these, coffee meetings and doing all these different meetups and things like that. So she was like, look, you've done your research. I'm sure you will be fine. And also you have a bit of experience behind you that if you ever need to, you can always jump back into it. So I think one of the big things that I would say to people is, just make the jump, because if worst case scenario, it doesn't work out, you can always go back to what you've done before because you have that experience, but you'll never be able to make the jump if you're, people, you can always be scared of doing something. I've learned that fear can just help, you just need to use the fear to push you forward. So for example, this podcast, I've never really done podcasts before, but you asked me to come on, and I was like, you know what? It's something that I've never really done before. I think it's really important to try, and you just got to do it, because otherwise, you'll kind of you'll sit back and look back about 5 years later and be like, Jesus, if I'd done it then, where could I be now? And you never want to kind of think about it in that way.
Look, that's right. You might be hooked after this, Rebekah, and start your own.
Yeah, exactly. I'll quit UX design and go into this instead.
That's right. Well, your story reminds me very much of when I left my first career. I worked as a tax consultant with KPMG, and I remember telling my parents that I was leaving accounting, and I'd completed a Bachelor of Commerce and I'd done a professional year to be a chartered accountant to become a recruiter, which at that time most people who worked in recruitment, you didn't really need a degree, or you didn't really need any sort of education. And I always said, look, I can always go back to accounting if I need to. But like you, I think I'd done the research and I was so sure in my heart that it was going to be a much better career fit for me, that I didn't really once ever regretted my decision.
Yeah. And I think I was also, of course, like very lucky. I had a great support system around me. My parents did support me, and I moved over to Sydney with my boyfriend. So he was also very supportive of the big change as well. So I was lucky in that sense. But if you feel it, sorry, that sounds so like hippy dippy, but like if you think it's something that you're interested in and you put that time in to do the research, I think it's something that you should, you should go down that road a little bit and see if it is something you're interested in.
Yeah, and that's right. And if you've done the research, then hopefully a lot of the fear is gone by the time you actually make the change.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing I would say, and maybe we'll touch on it a bit later, but the experience that you have in any other profession will help you moving forward. So for me, and this is something I would think about, if you do decide to go and do one of the bootcamp courses or any course really, and you have any experience previously, just that's how you kind of can stand out. So for me, when I was going for interviews and applying for jobs after General Assembly, the way I stood out was from my past experience. Can I talk to stakeholders? Can someone put me in front of a client? All of these different things, I just played up so much so that I could come across like a strong designer based off my previous experience.
That's great advice. So, at the end of the day, you were at GA to learn the technical skills, but then you already had all these great core skills to back that up.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess for me, like the main reason I went to GA was to get a job, so like there's a lot of the stuff that you can learn through like Coursera courses or Udemy courses. A lot of the actual like reading around it you could do by yourself, but having the network or the support that GA gave you to have this demo day at the end where they bring in different companies and different kind of hiring arms from different companies, and you get to speak to them and they get to see you and they get to see your work. I think that was a big thing for me. It's like I want to work in this space. I'm not looking to do a PhD in design. I just want to work in it and see if it's something I'm interested in. So that's kind of the main reason I decided to do one of these conversion courses.
Okay, so you rocked up, you arrived in Sydney, you rocked up at General Assembly for day one. Tell us a little bit about, the class size, and, I'm really interested also to hear about the background of your colleagues who are completing the course.
Yeah, so I rocked up. Oh my God, it was a very bad idea. I literally arrived in Sydney the day before I started the GA course. So I arrived in Sydney, and then the next day I was in General Assembly, which I would not recommend to anyone else because the jet lag and everything. I'd say everyone that met me in the first week or two thought I was absolutely crazy. But so we had a class of, there was 11 of us, I think. Yeah, 11 people. And we had a mix of backgrounds. So I came from, I guess, consulting, Scrum Master background. We had a couple of people who came from, I guess, more development backgrounds. There was one or two software developers, a couple of people from marketing, a couple of people from graphic design, a couple of people from advertising, and then there was actually one lady, and she had run her own cleaning business. And she had come in as well, and she was doing the conversion course to get into UX design. She actually had her own cleaning agency, been doing it for I think 7 years, and then came in. So that was also really interesting to see how why she kind of moved in as well.
So it sounds like quite a few of your colleagues had technical backgrounds, but not everyone.
Yeah, it was a nice mix. I think it seemed like people had worked in industries that had touched on UX design, so they got a bit of a flavor for it, and then that made them want to go in themselves.
And can you just sort of give us a brief overview of, how the course is run and the types of modules that you cover in that course?
Yeah, so I guess the way that they structured the course in General Assembly was as if you were doing a project yourself. The different modules were kind of very progressive. So you would start off with the user research phase. So, I guess firstly, like understanding how do you figure out what the problem is, and then based off understanding the problem, doing your stakeholder interviews, doing your user interviews, doing your contextual research. So like a lot of the research stuff that is usually done at the start of a project when you're in a client or when you're in a company, they started with that kind of information first. And then basically you would do a lot of the research heavy, you learn about the research side of UX design. Then you would do a project where you would kind of use the stuff that you'd learned and implement it into the project, and then present that project back to your to the class. And then you would move into, I guess, the synthesis side of UX design. So based off kind of user research and things like that, how do you synthesize the information that you have, and how do you figure out if you're solving the right problem? And I guess it goes through this, I'm going to like the double diamond, which for designers, you go from a problem and then you expand out based off research, and then you come back to a problem that is actually based off research, and then you try and solve it, and then based off usability testing, you come up with the final solution. So it's kind of this like expansion, contraction, and that's kind of how the modules were conducted. Sorry, that probably sounds super complicated, but if only I had a whiteboard, I could like draw it out or something.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I haven't heard of the double diamond before, so I've learnt something new. And then how did you come to get your first job at the end of the course?
So I was very lucky. How I met, so Adam Faulkner, who is the director from Blue Egg, he came to our careers day. So at the end of the General Assembly course, you have a careers fair where people from different companies come in and they can look at your portfolio and they can ask you questions about your, what are you looking for in a career and in a role and things like that. And I actually met Adam, who is from Blue Egg there, and he, I guess, kind of did not an informal interview, but we had a conversation. We had a chat about where I had come from and what I was interested in. And based off that, he called me back in for a second round interview. And then off that, he offered me a job. So I was actually really lucky that based off the careers day from General Assembly, I got my role.
Yeah, fantastic. And tell us a little bit about what Blue Egg does.
Yeah, so Blue Egg is a design agency, and they're very focused on the user research side of things. So creating or making design decisions based off research and creating solutions based off that. So we work with a lot of universities, and we've also worked within the financial services sector. And what other companies have I worked on? I've done like three different projects. And also, I guess, software as a service as well. So working with companies that provide digital services for their users. And I guess it's really interesting because we're a small agency. We get to work on a lot of different types of projects. So the current project that I'm working on now is so different to my initial one, and that's also the main reason why I wanted to get into UX design, because my first, the project that I just finished was very UI intensive. So, trying to make pixel perfect pages for a client, whereas the one I'm working on now is very research focused. So it's trying to understand, like doing user interviews. So talking to a lot of people, trying to figure out like the problems that they have. Are these kind of global problems? Are these problems that most people would have, or are they specific to a certain individual? And I guess going from, looking at like creating digital mock-ups on a screen to doing face-to-face, or I guess through Zoom now, interviews with people, it's a nice balance, which I think is really good.
Is there a typical day that you could sort of describe the types of tasks and what you would do, throughout the day, whether it's meetings or research or sort of more technical work?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I guess, like as you said, it does vary, but this variance is, I guess, more weeks, or you could have a couple of weeks doing similar tasks. So for example, at the moment, like my day to day. You have a check-in with the team in the morning to see how everyone's going, and what, like, if there's any challenges or if anyone needs any help with any of their projects. Then you jump off that and you start working on, for me, we're starting to do user interviews for our client or for the project that we're working on. So figuring out, okay, what's the script? So like, what are the questions we need to ask? What are the tasks that we need to get users to do? So for example, we're trying to look at a website and see if people can find things on a website. So if you're looking on ASOS or The Iconic, can they find a green dress, or can they find like blue shoes? And creating these tasks to try and find them. So that's that's kind of in a nutshell what we're doing in our current project. So that's kind of the thing we're doing. And then a lot of the time you're working with a team and you're working with a client. So, talking to your client and asking them for all the relevant information, getting that and putting that into the work that you're doing. We're also doing a presentation for our client then on Friday. So making sure we can have everything ready for that. And, like we practice that, and we can, we do have all the questions and answers that we need ready for that. And I think that's also an important thing as a designer, is not only being able to do designs or come up with good solutions, but also being able to communicate them back to the client is super important. And it's something that I don't think I understood that communication was important, but I think communicating your designs back to a client. So if a client asks, like, why did you put that there? Like, we want it there. Understanding how to say, well, based off, 6 of your users couldn't understand why certain things were in a certain place, and being able to say that to your client in a way that's not going to tell him he's wrong or he or she is wrong is super important.
So it sounds to me like there's a lot of people contact and a lot of, those user interviews, would they like when it's not COVID, would those usually be face-to-face, like in a workshop setting, or would they be one-on-one interviews, or would you be emailing them instructions?
I think most people would prefer to do face-to-face interviews, because you obviously get a lot of information by the way someone reacts physically to certain questions. So what we usually do is it is one-on-one interviews. So you'll be asking them about themselves and how they interact with the product or service. I've never actually been involved in the workshop. Well, in Accenture, I did kind of workshop facilitation. And that is another way of doing user interviews as well, or getting, I guess, user feedback. But yeah, having that in-person thing, that in-person contact is super, super beneficial. So it has been interesting through the pandemic, doing it in a more digital sense.
And often when someone Googles UX designer, we see a photo of people standing in front of a whiteboard with lots of Postit notes.
That's what we do.
Can you explain what you're actually doing with all those Postit notes?
Yeah. No, that's it's so funny. I think it's it's such a generic kind of photo that you have of people. And then also when you kind of start whipping out your Postit notes in front of people that have never worked with a UX designer before, everyone's like, what is she doing? Like, sticking Post-its everywhere. But yes, so as a UX designer, I think one thing I've learned is that obviously working in a digital space is super important. But so like being able to kind of create up mock-ups online and things like that. But actually like sketching and writing up like Post-it notes is super, super beneficial for just trying to figure out what the problem is. So for example, you do your user interview. The user tells you what their main pain points are. Like, so what do they struggle with? What do they like? What would they prefer to have as part of the service? And then once you finish that, you like come together as a team and you start like writing down on Post-it notes what the main points were from that interview. And then once you have all the interviews done and you have all the Post-its written out, which can be like hundreds, you then start like throwing them up on the wall and grouping similar ones together. And this helps people And this is part of the synthesis section, which I was talking about before. And this synthesis basically helps you figure out what are the main themes that are coming out of this research. Are there actually, two main reasons why people aren't using this product? Or are there, 5 issues or, benefits that people just love and that's all they want to see in the product? And using your Post-it notes and using and sticking them up on the wall helps you to kind of just visually see in one space where like what those themes are. So I guess that's kind of in a nutshell what you see when you see those pictures taken.
No, well, thank you for explaining that great mystery, Rebekah. That's very... So in your experience working in this area, what particular skills and attributes do you feel are most helpful for someone to be successful in this area?
Well, one thing I would say is there's not just one type of designer. As a designer, there are so many different like avenues and roads you can go down and you can specialize in. So you can be, a really good researcher, or you could be a really good, high fidelity prototype, creating the kind of the hi-fi products. But I guess for me, what I have found anyway in my experience is being a good communicator, I think is a really important skill, or something that I have definitely seen to be very important when you're working on client projects. So I work in an agency, I work with clients. So being able to understand how I can tell them in layman's terms why we should do a certain thing or why we should change their product to be a certain way is really important. I also think the second thing that's super, super important is being able to receive feedback. So for me, where was I? I was like, oh yeah, it was back when I was in GA and I was like creating my first ever, wireframes or something like that. And I was, I put them all together and I spent loads of time on them and I didn't want anyone to see them before they were like pixel perfect. And then I showed them to someone and they were like, Rebekah, well, you kind of completely missed the point on this and you really should have done something like that. And I was like, no, this is perfect. This is fine. Like I've already spent so much time on it. And it's like, if you're not receptive to feedback, it can be very difficult as a UX designer. And it's also quite, it's difficult to hear if the thing that you created isn't good, or not even that it's not good, but it's just not correct for the target audience. But I think it is something that you need to learn to be able to do, because it just then helps to ensure that what you create is usable.
Very interesting. And I probably wouldn't have expected that second attribute as something, it's not something you would typically think of. So that's really helpful. I mean, I can hear in your voice that you are pretty energized by this work.
Yeah, I love it.
Why do you feel that this area of working in UX is perhaps a better fit for you career-wise than what you were doing previously?
I think because it's a mix of all the things that I really like from my previous jobs. So I get to solve problems, which is the main reason why I did like engineering and different things like that. But it ensures that I'm solving the right problems because I get to talk to all these people, which is like the social aspect that I really, really love. I literally get to follow people around sometimes, and see how they do their job, which I think or how they work with a product or a service, which I think is really interesting. As well as that, like I also get to see all these different industries. Like I've learned so much about so many random industries that I never would have learned about if I hadn't been working as a designer. And I think that constant change I guess that steep learning curve at the start of a project is something that I weirdly really like. I like to get to understand a new industry quite quickly. I think that's kind of cool. So I guess that's kind of the main reasons why I really like it. And also just like working with your hands and working with a team. So, you're like sketching something out and you're creating something new and it's all kind of exciting in that way, or I find it exciting anyway.
Often people feel that anything that's design focused is perhaps working very independently, but, this role sounds like there's a lot of people contact.
Yeah, I think, well, like for me anyway, I think working as a designer is super collaborative. And it's one of the reasons why I really, really like it. I think if I had to work like by myself as like an independent designer on a project, I would struggle a bit, because that, like, the ability to bounce ideas off someone else helps you to create better ideas. You know, like if you're struggling with something and you start talking to someone else, just the ability of like talking out loud can almost help you come up with the solution yourself. So I think that's one thing I really like. And I guess some of the things that I think people believe about designers is like, you need to be really good, or like you need to be really artistic, or you need to be really good at drawing and things like that, and you kind of work by yourself. Working by yourself, I'm sure that like there definitely are places out there where you would work independently, and like that's great. It's just not something that I would be interested in. But also like being good at like drawing and design is also something I'm not very good at. But I'm good at, like, I guess I'm learning to be better at that, but it also isn't something that you don't need to be like Leonardo, like Michelangelo or whatever, to be a good designer, which I think is really important to understand as well. Just being able to communicate your designs and stuff is all you need.
But there is some level of drawing involved.
Oh yeah, but if you have ever seen, like, I can send you some of my sketches, and they will make no sense. But you know, it's just to help you wrap your head around something, and like, you know, it'll be a couple of boxes. So say if you're creating a new app to buy clothes on or something, you will have like a big rectangle and then little rectangles in it. It doesn't need to be a 3D image of like all these different cool shoes that you're going to be selling. It just needs to show the functionality of how you buy a pair of shoes. So yeah, I guess it doesn't mean, it's not going to be like the end product. It's just going to show you kind of how it would work.
And doesn't need to be, measured and to scale necessarily.
Oh my God, no way. If that was what sketches would be for, I don't think I'd ever be able to like finish a project. It's just to kind of help you figure out how everything would sit within within a page or within a screen.
So Rebekah, you've been through this experience and you've come to Australia and you're now working as a UX designer. What advice would you have for others considering a career change into UX?
For me, my advice would be do your research. So whether that be talk to people that you know, or reach out to people via LinkedIn and different things like that. Try a couple of quick courses online. So, there are all these free different courses that you can get on Coursera, Udemy, or, doing a hackathon or going to a meetup just to see if this is something that you'll be interested in doing. So I think making sure that you do your research first is super, super important. Because then I think it gives you the confidence to then go in and make the jump, which I think for me really, really helped. And then honestly, I would just say, just do it. Like, just try it and see if it is something that you want to do. And, worst case scenario, you go back to the role that you're currently in now. But best case, you're now in a role that you love and that you're going to stay in for, you can see yourself like flourishing in, which I think is what everyone really wants.
Well, the proof, you are proof that, by doing the right research, doing the experiments, that, you can make a change if you're also willing to put yourself out there a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. I think just having a little bit, maybe being a little bit naive. I think I was a bit naive about the whole thing, and I was like, it'll be fine. Everything will be fine. It'll all work out. I think having a little bit of that naivety kind of helped, because I remember halfway through the General Assembly course, I literally took a step back and I was like, what the hell have I done? I'm literally in a country I don't know anyone, and I'm doing something I don't even know if I can get a job in. But like, I did it, and then it all worked out. So whatever you do, it'll something, everything works out. Everything happens for a reason. And I think, it's good to have that naivety to just take the jump and do it.
And maybe a little bit of Irish luck in there as well.
Yeah, maybe you need a little Irish luck. No, I'm sure it'll be fine. But yeah.
And one last question, Rebekah. What are your career goals, or what's next for you?
So for, I guess for me, I just really want to learn as much as I can as a UX designer. You know, as I mentioned, there are lots of different avenues you can go down, and I think I'm still trying to figure out what type of designer I want to be. You know, is it like a UX researcher? Is it more kind of at the end doing that hi-fi fidelity prototyping? Is it a service designer? You know, and then it's like, what type of industry am I interested in? I think I'm like, you know, I've made the jump into UX design, but I'm still trying to figure out what type of designer I want to be. So I think I'm going to be spending a bit more time trying to figure that out, and then just improving my skills in that area. You know, everyone says, you know, you have a T shape, you're kind of T-shaped. So you have a breadth of skills that you're good at, and then you have those deep lines of areas that you, I guess, are very, very knowledgeable in. So I guess for me, it's trying to figure out what areas I want to spend the time like digging deep into.
Well, look, congratulations on what sounds like a very successful career change. I'm delighted that you came on the program, and I just feel that your advice and your insights is going to be so useful to the listeners, and I've learned so much. I finally know what all those Post-it notes are all about, so thank you.
No, don't worry. I think it's oh God, it's very funny. I keep saying, oh yeah, communication is a really big thing. So hopefully I've communicated that properly, but I'm sure there might be a couple of question marks, but sure, that's what Google's there for, I guess. But yeah, if anyone has any questions or is interested, you can leave my contact details in the show notes.
Well, thank you, Rebekah. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you well for the rest of the year.
No, thank you too, and good luck with everything at the moment and in the future, Leah.
Thanks, Rebekah. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Relaunch Your Career. If you did, please subscribe, share with your friends, leave a review, or connect with us on social media at Relaunch Me Career Consulting. If you have any questions about the episode or the work that we do, then contact us via the website relaunchme.com.au. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.